Hello, one and all, and welcome back for another episode of AI News, Drama, and Updates. Every week now, I do a broadcast covering the headlines in the AI space, and we've started to delve a little bit more recently into just the future in general. Let's start by taking a look at the new developments in the GPT space this week, starting with the fact that OpenAI has now opened an office in London. Sam had mentioned something about wanting to open an office in London as they were going back and forth with the EU regulations, trying to come to terms. And based on this, it looks like they executed on that. There were articles that I found that still mentioned they're looking for even more locations in Poland, France, and even elsewhere in the UK. And based on the type of work they do, the location of the actual processing, things of that nature, I'm not sure exactly how offices in specific locations maybe benefit them, but it stands to reason that working with local regulators is probably a little bit easier when you are local. Even though Sam Altman is one of the first in line to try to get OpenAI under heavier regulation and heavier guidances, that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of people who really want this more heavily regulated or even eliminated completely. Let's be real, AI is very polarizing for a lot of people. And on that note, just like Apple and just like a number of other companies, we're seeing that Congress has been limited in using even ChatGPT themselves. Now, we've talked before about privacy being addressed, but the rules that I've come to understand from reading articles like this is that they're only allowed to use ChatGPT Plus, not the free version, just because the extra security features and things like that exist in GPT-4. So it's just a little bit safer. A congressperson who's using GPT is also not allowed to use it just to do their job. They're able to reference it. And it feels like not allowing GPT to do the thinking or reasoning for them may be a double-edged sword for a number of congresspeople who don't have high thinking or reasoning skills. But just like with Apple, just like with major companies like Amazon, the concern is that they drop information here that should be protected. Whether it's classified information or things along those lines, they accidentally can train the model and have this information get elsewhere. And while that might not sound like a big deal, you can imagine if your search history, for example, got saved into Google and was able to influence other people's searches, it would become problematic. But as time goes on, there's a lot of people that are coming to believe that ChatGPT is one of the first LLM systems. And eventually, we're going into a number of different directions, more specialized systems. Maybe Congress one day will have a system that just gets used by Congress that's trained with specific information that should be available only to people with clearance, for example. And that might sound like a wild thing to say right now because based on what we're seeing with Google Bard or really anything that might compete with GPT-4, nothing really comes close yet. But you may remember a few weeks back, Google made the decision to bring DeepMind back into the fold and combine different departments. And without going too much into DeepMind's history and what they've done, one of the things that they're known for was the creation of AlphaGo, which was one of the first AI systems able to beat a human player in a game called Go. This article and this claim basically says they're going to use some of that strategy and some of those features in their next chatbot, the thing that they're building to rival ChatGPT. And while GPT-4 is closed source and they're very tight-lipped about the systems that comprise it, how it's made up, I've seen a lot of instances where people with high technical prowess are able to reverse engineer these systems and explain how GPT was comprised. So even though things are closed source, it seems like the information is available to compete with something like GPT if you have the resources. Competing companies like Google or Anthropic, they're going to be keeping a very close eye on that so that they can build things in kind. And like we've talked about here multiple times, generative search is already the future. It's slowly already replacing Google's search. GPT is already becoming one of the de facto search options that people turn to. And as much as it pains me to say it, Microsoft Bing is becoming more and more relevant. The browsing ability of GPT-4 is now available for anyone who has ChatGPT Plus access. It was originally a beta feature. I've been using it for a bit and it's pretty cool. It's kind of hit and miss. Really and personally, what I've found the advantage is when you need fresh context with something. If you need it to access the newest version of documentation, for example. If you go to use GPT-4 and you just ask a general question, you're going off of what has already been trained into the model. When you use the option to choose with browsing, GPT-4 goes through this process where it'll download data from a third-party website and pull that context in, so you can get more relevant answers. Imagine having it download a manual for a programming language or the entire terms of service for a platform, and then you can ask general questions about it. So definitely something to check out if you haven't already. It's pretty cool. Last week I mentioned I want to start delving a little bit more into the quantum space. It's going to have some crossover with AI. And this week we're going to dip our toes back into this space without going too hard. I just wanted to touch on this story about Iran. A while back we had Imam Khomeini University of Marine Sciences and Technology, and they revealed what they said was the first product of a quantum processing algorithm. But as it turns out, what they had was a $600 board from something like Amazon. I'm not quite sure what the strategy was here, but when the media, asked them about it, they weren't able to really explain much about it. So they had to do a complete heel turn and basically say, no, 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 we don't actually have anything quantum whatsoever. And I did want to go on to say that last week I'd mentioned that the future of personal computers was also going to go quantum, but it won't be overnight. And without real working quantum computers that we can readily test against, it's hard to say whether they're really going to give us that performance boost that they hypothesize. We're talking about an area of computer tech that is so physically hard to understand that we don't know how it works just yet. A lot of it is theoretical. But I was reading through different articles and I came across this quote that I think brings a lot of respect to the processors that we use right now. And it says here, if you ever code something that feels like a hack, but it just works, just remember that a CPU is literally a rock that we tricked into thinking. Not to oversimplify it, but you have to flatten the rock and put lightning inside of it, which is a very apt description of the silicon wafer that comprises a regular CPU. So basically, as time goes on, if things continue to go as theorized, quantum processors will potentially become more available, but these regular silicon-based CPUs will potentially change and improve as well. We could potentially end up with a variety of computer architectures, maybe serving different purposes or having different strengths and weaknesses. We'll have to see how it pans out. But getting back into something that isn't as theoretical, and we're talking about the AI art space, I wanted to talk about DragGAN. Now, admittedly, it's not absolutely amazing yet. When you use something like this, it's got these specialized models that work for specialized things. So if you're seeing a cat, for example, it's got a cat model. A horse has a horse model. Cars have car models. But you can see very clearly what it does. Once you've started processing with DragGAN, you can add these different points and you can drag them closer together or further apart. And as you do, the diffusion graphic will change and try to continue to stay coherent. DragGAN is one of those fantastic technologies that's only going to get more and more powerful as more specialized models continue to be released for it. Personally, I haven't spent enough time with it yet to know if it's something that I'll be able to create my own models eventually or anything along those lines. But it's certainly something I see having a ton of commercial value. Getting the perfect pose for a stock image or something along those lines. Now, it is noteworthy to point out, especially as you're seeing a face get changed like this, you'll notice that the facial features do change. It's not exactly the same person. These are each diffusion graphics, so each frame is a person that doesn't actually exist. But to keep coherent and keep the same model from one pose to another, I think is probably the next stage for something like this. Especially in terms of human modeling. But I would imagine, especially with like cars or things that have to be very specifically engineered, it's going to throw the measurements way off. But nevertheless, this is incredibly impressive for its fledgling state, and I'm very curious to see what's going to come next. All right, last thing I want to talk about today in the world of AI art is going to be Adobe Firefly, and specifically Adobe's indemnity clause. Now, this was something that flew beneath my radar originally, but I'll talk about it. Basically, a lot of people are freaked out about using AI art. Because Adobe actually owns the rights to each of the stock images that they use to create this model, they are not at all concerned about copyright lawsuits. They're so not concerned about copyright lawsuits that they're making the claim that if you get sued or if you have to deal with anything legal, they'll take care of it. They're quoted here as saying, a lot of our big enterprise customers are very concerned about using generative AI without understanding how it was trained. They don't see it as viable for commercial use. So yeah, if you're an artist and you uploaded things to Adobe Stock at any point, or potentially even Adobe Cloud Services, I would check your terms of service because it seems like you've given away your rights. And what I foresee happening, I assume sometime soon, is we're going to see platforms that exercise their rights to use the data that's uploaded to their platform. These platforms with terms of service may or may not have the rights to use media, text, graphics, things that we own the copyrights to, but they also share in those rights. And it may be well within their rights to create a full model based on the stuff that we originally created. That's just how AI and ML works. But unfortunately, and I'll say this yet again, this is the end game of the artists who are continually talking about the strength of copyrights and copyrights needing to be protected. All we're doing is reinforcing these mega conglomerates, these huge corporations that technically own the rights to things. But let's switch gears. Let's talk about some tech that is coming down the pipe, some stuff that you're going to see soon. We've talked before about legal cases. We've talked about AI in the law. We've talked about GPT being involved in court, things like that. Well, Thomson Reuters has bought CaseText, which was a Y Combinator-backed project. And when we're dealing with costs that are over $500 million, that's nothing to sneeze at. CaseText, which is something that most of us, I'm sure, have not heard of. You basically have a co-pilot lawyer AI. So theirs is called Co-Counsel. It taps into this AI to review these documents, and as you'd expect, based on the context that it's supplied, it gives legal advice or legal precedent, or points out patterns that it locates. And when we're speaking about a Copilot in general, we've talked before about how Windows 11 is going to have this Copilot Bing type of thing replacing Cortana. Well, it's coming soon, and actually it's here now for people that have the public preview of Windows 11. Now, while this is maybe tempting for me to turn on myself and potentially give you some feedback on, I am terrified of the prospect of Windows 11 Bing being more integrated into my system, potentially having ads in my windows. I don't want any of those things. I do want an AI assistant, but I don't feel like Microsoft is going to integrate it in a way that's smooth. So I'm going to hold off personally on this one. But if any of you guys check it out yourself, definitely let me know in the comments what you think about it. If you're in the Windows Insider program, Dev Channel users, this is the build number, and it's going to be the first to enable Copilot for you. So if you're interested, go ahead and check it out. As a warning, though, the article does say Copilot will launch with Bing ads right out of the gate. Microsoft will serve you ads that the company thinks is relevant. Copilot's governed by the same privacy as the rest of Bing. So if you use Bing and you're already seeing ads there, probably something similar. And while we just talked about that paltry $500 million+ investment into case text, Inflection lands a $1.3 billion investment to build a more personal AI. In what is potentially one of the more exciting pieces of news this week, this is one of the first things that's really going to potentially rival OpenAI and ChatGPT. This article talks about Inflection, which is a team of like 35 people. They launched something called Pi, which is designed to provide knowledge about a person's interests and needs. Well, personal AI is kind of the expanded version of that, or at least that's the idea. But I will say this, there's a lot of companies that have said things along the lines of being able to compete with OpenAI and GPT-4. So I'm going to believe it when I see it. $1.3 billion is certainly not a small amount of money, but that doesn't mean anything until they actually put it into action. But the idea with this funding is they can eventually exceed the capabilities of GPT-4, so we'll have to keep an eye on it. While this isn't necessarily an update on an existing story, this is an update on a challenge that we've had as humans for a long time. And as humans, part of understanding our own past and even our own written history is trying to make sense out of a lot of these dead languages or things that aren't really written or spoken anymore. So this was a pretty cool article where AI is being used to translate these 5,000-year-old tablets, and we're able to read what humans 5,000 years ago had to say. When we think about languages that are that old and we're speaking a more modern language like American English, we sometimes forget about how much language has evolved. So this AI system isn't translating cuneiform into English, it's translating it into Latin, which is a dead language in and of itself, but closer to modern English. So from there, we can translate it again. Based on the article, we're seeing like a 97% accuracy, which seemed great. And while this is absolutely amazing, and I wouldn't want to take anything away from this, what I was thinking as I was reading through it was, what about languages like what whales speak, or dolphins, birds? We know that lots of languages have patterns that go behind them, and potentially AI would give us the ability to make sense out of those patterns in a way that we maybe couldn't. Moving on to an update about Runway, I just wanted to show that they got another $141 million investment. We've talked about Runway a number of different times. They were incredibly important to bringing Stable Diffusion 1.5 to the table. And ever since then, they've moved from Gen 1 into Gen 2. Runway, just as a refresher, does text to video, which is a technology that we're starting to see some big moves being made in now. One of the reasons that I wanted to show this article specifically is it shows the valuation of a lot of the companies that we've talked about. You know, with this influx of cash, this brings Runway up to $237 million, while Character AI is at $150 million, and Stability AI is actually surprisingly at only about $100 million. Switching to a very different gear, I saw a news story come out about TikTok. So TikTok's owner, ByteDance, came out with this whole new app, and it's invite only. It's not something that you're easily going to be able to download and use. But for those who have the invite, what we're doing here is creating AI music based on you just humming a song. I don't know enough about it to give you an example. I haven't seen it in action to know how well it works, but this is what I have so far. We're certainly going to keep an eye on this because I'm sure anything dealing with music is going to have a tumultuous future. Also, in the entertainment world, let's talk about the Grammy Awards. So it turns out you can't win a Grammy with something that you've just created with AI. but AI is not totally forbidden when it comes to winning an award like this. Now, I'm not sure if there was an event or something that triggered this specifically. Maybe it was even the writer's strike. But there was an update made to the eligibility criteria for winning a Grammy Award that just basically says only human creators are eligible to be submitted for consideration. That much makes sense. And it says a work that contains no human authorship is not eligible. And I think that's also fair. The rest of this article goes on to talk about mostly music. It talks about riff fusion, which we've covered here. It even talks about generative FM. But personally, in my opinion, they worded it in a way that's extremely fair, and that makes perfect sense for giving a human an award of recognition that they deserve recognition. Now, game developers who are maybe interested in using generative AI to create their games are probably really excited about Unity's recent announcement. Unity Muse and Unity Centis are AI-powered experiences that allow you to just kind of make as you go. At least as you look at this, things seem powerful, they seem exciting. And then you scroll down and you get a lot of questions from people about the data sets and where did this information come from, and their licensing from GPT and from third parties. And so this creates another situation that we're going to have to keep an eye on to see what Unity is going to do about it, if anything. I highly doubt they need to. Now, for people that aren't familiar with Unity, Unity is a game development engine. You can create your own video game from scratch and sell it on your own. Essentially, Unity gives you the power to be entrepreneurial, where you don't have to design your own physics engine, your own lighting system, things like that. So these are tools that don't necessarily have to be used. They're just additional features. And it feels like for about a year now, I've been dealing with similar arguments, especially in the AI art space and things like that. So my hot tip for Unity is just hold your ground. If you tell these folks where this information comes from, it won't quell their fears, it won't make them happy, and it certainly won't stop them from yelling at you. But moving into the last story for today, I wanted to talk about Steam. Steam is reportedly rejecting games with AI-generated artwork. Now, this isn't fully true. I did check on a number of different games that I'm familiar with that use AI-generated artwork, and they're still up on the platform. Everything I've seen so far comes from a single developer who tried to put a build up of his game and the build was rejected. So while at first this is a scathing headline, as you read deeper, you're going to see that most of this comes from a single instance. There was a developer who put a beta build of his game up. It was rejected for having AI-generated content. They had questions as to the authorship and ownership of the material. The developer, who goes by PotterHarry97, he said the initial submission was intended as a placeholder, with 2 to 3 assets sprites that were admittedly obviously AI-generated from the hands. Now, because they'd stopped him with this early moderation and the concerns about the AI-generated art, even after he went to submit another build with more modernized graphics, he was surprised to find that they rejected it. So that's where some of these questions are coming from in terms of, what do we do? There are games with AI out there. This is an example of a game that used Mid-Journey graphics, for example. There were posters within the game, there was concept art that was created around it, all kinds of stuff. And while AI Dungeon has absolutely trash reviews and it's a garbage fire of a game at this point, it still exists. Valve has not eliminated it, even though it has AI right in the title. Look, as a gamer myself who sees the immense potential of machine learning integrated into video games, I understand the fears of artists who don't want their work stolen or don't want to be out of work. I get that. But we can't take a hardline stance against a technological concept like machine learning and expect that that's going to stop that from happening. If artists want to make a real change, if they want to send a message to the world about AI and AI art, they need to band together against the corporations, not against the people who are trying to use AI to create art. But again, just to recap, just like we talked about with the Marvel thing, a lot of times what we're dealing with isn't people being out of work. It's not even hurting the art world. It's not hurting any artists whatsoever. So I was glad to see at least Valve looks like it's taking things case by case and not making a blanket decision that's going to affect a lot of games all at the same time. But on that note, I will say that that is the end of today's video. I really appreciate those of you who stuck with me all the way until the end. Those of you who liked, subscribed. If you hit that little notification bell, that's amazing. I appreciate that. But anyways, I do thank you for your time here with me today. I'll see you next week for another AI news, drama, and update video. And as always, thank you for watching.